Whether you're starting on the path to financial independence or just trying to get your financial health under control, knowing how to start a budget is critical in your path to success and financial health. So today I want to share with you 5 steps that I take to start a budget and that I've used others to help start their first budget. They're going to be very beginner focused, but we'll get into advanced strategies later on down the road. So if you're new to the channel, my name's Will, and this channel is all about improving your financial literacy and sharing the path to financial independence together. If you're interested in that, be sure to subscribe down below. Leave me a comment with where you are on the path to financial independence and what it kind of means to you. So with that, let's get right into the video. So I'm going to assume you've already kind of done step 1 in this process, and you've already tracked your income and expenses. If you haven't yet, I have a video that I'll link up above. So if you already have your gross income, you need to find your net income as well. If you don't know how to do that, there are some free online tools, and I'll link that below. It's the same online tool that I use in my free budgeting tool. I have a free finance and budgeting packet it's a free download, and I'll link it down below as well. If you've used it, that same online tool is what I recommend everybody use. It's super simple, and it's going to get you pretty close. So the next step is to take your 10 to 15% and pay yourself first. This basically means you're going to take 10 to 15% of your pay off the top, and that's what you're going to pay into a tax-deferred account. Think of this as your safety net. You know, if all else fails, if I lost everything and all my endeavors failed, that's the money that I'll retire on at 60. I recommend strongly that you take the long-standing advice that everybody gives, pay yourself first, and pay that into a tax-deferred account as your safety net. You want to start this as early as possible to take advantage of compound interest. If you're in your 20s and 30s, that might be or even younger is better, that might be the most valuable money you spend your entire life because you leave it in there for 40 years to grow. So it's really important, and you don't want to skip that step. The minimum should be 10%, but 10 to 15% is where most people are going to land here. That brings me to step 2, your fixed expenses. These are all the expenses that are fixed every single month. The first category is kind of going to be your low interest and your basic living. This is your housing, maybe your vehicle, your utilities that don't change from month to month. These are probably going to be the bulk of your expenses, and this is where you start the foundation. The second category is going to be all your minimum payments to your high interest accounts. This is your credit cards, any other consumer debt, maybe a high interest auto loan. And here to clarify, I do have a line high to low interest. Mine's 4% personally. You may have a little bit different, and we'll talk about that in step 4. So once you have your fixed income, that's your basis, and you can go on to step 3. Now, step 3 are your floating basic living expenses. These are all the expenses that are kind of critical to your reasonable quality of life. This is the stuff like your grocery bill, all your utilities that may not be fixed. This might be your transportation costs for fuel or public transportation. So since these float, there are a few different ways that you can manage it. I'll get more into these later, but just has a few examples for you to start thinking about. You know, one of them is amortization. If you can take one of these, like insurance, and make that a 6-month or annual payment, you can divide, say it's $1,200 every 12 months. You divide that by 12, so you pay $100 into an account each month. Whenever that bill comes due, you simply pay it from the account you've been paying into. That's amortization. Another really, really good strategy that I use personally is one of my advanced tactics that I'll talk about in another video, is a rolling account. So this is where you take an expense that, while it's not fixed, it has pretty predictable cycles to it, peaks and troughs across seasons or the year, and you average those out over 12 months of what you expect it to be, or you pay the average. So basically what's happening is you're taking the extra you're paying in the troughs, and you're rolling that forward each month so that whenever the peak months come around, you have that to pay into. Now, you may not be able to get, to the exact dollar on here, but you want to try. You want to get as close as possible. And you never want to under budget for something to where you're busting your budget later on. That'll just frustrate you, and then you won't stick with it. So be reasonable about it and get as close as you can. Now, this may need adjusted over time, so just keep that in mind that this might be flexible since they are floating expenses. Okay, step 4. This is where you make your money. Step 4 is where you take all the funds that you have left over from step 1 through 3 and decide how much you can start paying into your debt or savings. I break this into 2 phases. So there's the debt phase, And I want, with the phase one, the debt phase, I want to go back to where we talked about high interest. Now, personally, I define high interest as any interest that's over 4%. That's my line, right? That is the debt I focused on first. I'm not comfortable with holding debt that's over 4%. For you, it may be a little bit different. For everyone, it floats a little, but for most people, it is going to be around that 4 or 5% mark. So, all decide on your line. All the funds that you have left over in phase one of step 4, you're going to take and throw at that debt. This is going to pay dividends in the long run because, number one, that's going to be less interest and payments that you're having to pay to an institution or bank that you don't need to. Number two, as you're knocking out those payments and you don't have the minimum payments from step 1 anymore, that's actually more money that's left over in this step to start putting towards savings, which brings me to phase 2. So there's a few different options here. First, you may want to look at just ratcheting up your safety net that we talked about. Pay yourself first to those tax-deferred accounts. If you're only at the minimum 10%, you might want to ratchet that up to 15 or whatever you want to get to, whatever you need to reach that goal. Once you have those safety nets, in place, this is where you can start to look at investments that might be something that you can touch before age 60 for your early retirement. It can be real estate, starting a business, or just other investments in general, so mutual fund accounts and things like that. It really is up to you, and this is where you get to choose the journey that you want to start on. And that's why this step really is so important. This is where you get to mold the path that you are on the way to financial independence. That brings me to step 5, everything else. So everything you have left over, and step 4 and 5 will teeter-totter a little bit, but here's the deal. Everything else is all of your quality of life improvements and your luxury costs. Everything that isn't a basic living cost, doesn't lower your debt, or isn't purchasing you an asset that makes you more money. And it's okay not to feel guilty here. If you do your due diligence from step 1 through 4, then you should have some wiggle room here, and that wiggle room will actually grow to make sure that you're still enjoying the path and the journey that you chose. So I want to clarify a few things about step 4 and 5. They sort of balance themselves out, and talking about the path kind of brings me to this, where you don't want to completely cut everything out to where you're not enjoying the journey. Because if you get to that point, it's going to be really hard to stay the path. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't be uncomfortable. In fact, not being okay with being a little bit uncomfortable is kind of a problem. And so you may need to get to that point to reach your goals. But personally, I'm not a fan of extreme minimalism or frugalism myself. Not to say there's anything wrong with it if you are. If you're a FIRE person, financial independence, retire early, and that's what it takes for you to meet your FI number by your specific date, then hey, there's nothing wrong with that. If, in fact, I support you, I think it's awesome, and I want to hear about it, but that's just not for me. I don't think that fits the majority of people either. And if you're on the path with someone else, you have a partner or a spouse that is going to be sharing the journey with you, it's even more important not to alienate them. If you're starting the path divided, it's going to be really hard to stay the path. So go into this with compromise in mind. Remember that it's okay to treat yourself a little bit as long as you're doing your due diligence in step 1 through 4. And that kind of brings me to a caveat here in a hybrid version of a hybrid way of doing this. So basically, if you've ever listened to Bigger Pockets Money podcast, then you've heard this before. Scott and Minnie talk about this constantly, and it is a common thing among the FI community and a lot of people who have reached FI. So basically, you start, a lot of people kind of go a little bit extreme at first, right? You start on the extreme side of things. You cut out as much as you can possibly stomach, and you really cinch down as far as you can. But this does get you some momentum. Your saving rate, explodes. You're able to get rid of some debt right at the front. But over time, sometimes quickly, you figure out that some things you cut out just are not worth cutting out. For me, that's taking my son to the zoo. That's a dinner out once a month with my wife, scotch or a glass of wine every once in a while in the evenings. Those sorts of things are what we value. In a previous video, I talked about where frugalism isn't being cheap. It's about aligning your spending with your values. So if you cinch down really tight at first and then ease back once you discover where your values are, then you're probably going to have a lot more success because it conditions you kind of. It's a psychological game. It conditions you at the beginning because you can be uncomfortable. It's okay. And things you thought you couldn't cut out, all of a sudden you can cut out and you can live without. And so now that's extra money you have in step 4 to put towards debt or towards your savings. But then over time, you discover that there are things that you're just not willing to give up, or that the journey is not enjoyable without. And you add those back slowly. The goal is to cinch down as far as possible while still enjoying the journey, and then adding back things slowly. It's sort of a hybrid way of doing this, and I think it's really effective because it is a very psychological game. Again, though, the trick is to make sure you're not being too rough on yourself. You're setting reasonable and realistic goals and expectations. And if you have a partner and spouse that or spouse that you're following the path with, that you are coming at them with compromise. You're not setting the law and wanting them to cut out everything because they may not be interested in that. So make sure that you sit down and you talk about it. It's really important here to make a long-term plan. And again, I'm going to be talking about education a lot, and it's because I really do think that it matters. Down in the description are the books that I really recommend you begin with. If you don't know what FI is, go check out the video on what financial independence really is. Just the fact that you're doing this in the first place and you're doing your due diligence from step 1 to step 4. I keep on doing this backwards. Step 1 to step 4. You're already setting yourself up for success, and you're already setting yourself up ahead of your peers because most people aren't doing that. So with that, really, thank you for watching to the end. If you're new and you want to share in this journey and you want to learn more, be sure to subscribe down below. Leave a comment with where you are in your path to financial independence, what FI means to you. If you're a returning subscriber, be sure you comment down below and let me know how things are going, because I really do care and I want to hear from you. Either way, leave me a comment and a like, because it also helps YouTube know that I'm putting out content that people want to see and that is quality. So with that, thanks again, guys, and I'll talk to you next time. 4 and 5, we'll teeter-totter a little bit. Yes, Liam? Is that you? Do you see yourself?
Myself.
Yourself?